Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. February always makes me think about second chances, probably because that's when everything started falling apart. I just turned 31, working nights at a medical billing company downtown, spending most evenings alone in my apartment scrolling through Netflix and eating takeout straight from the container. My last relationship had ended 8 months earlier when my ex decided he needed to find himself in Colorado, and honestly, I thought I was doing fine on my own. I had my routines, my Friday wine nights with coworkers, my Sunday calls with my mom. But that particular Thursday night in February, sitting in that dingy bar after my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner, watching all the happy couples slow dance while I nursed my 4th whiskey sour, the loneliness hit different. That's when Nathan walked up to my table with 2 beers and asked if I minded some company from another member of the singles club. Nathan had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room when he talked to you. Not in a creepy, intense way, but genuinely interested in every word you said. He remembered details from our first conversation that even I had forgotten mentioning, like how I collected vintage medical textbooks or that I was allergic to shellfish but ate it anyway, sometimes just to rebel against my own body. Within 3 weeks, he was texting me good morning messages with little observations about the weather or questions about my dreams from the night before. By week 5, he mentioned his landlord was selling his building and he needed to find a new place fast. And since I had that empty second bedroom just sitting there collecting dust and old Amazon boxes, offering it seemed like the natural thing to do. My friend Kimberly raised an eyebrow when I told her, but Nathan had already shown me his pay stubs from his remote IT job, and the extra $800 a month would help me finally pay off my student loans. Moving day happened on a Saturday, and Nathan showed up with just 3 suitcases and a desktop computer, which seemed refreshingly simple compared to my ex who had owned 17 different kitchen gadgets he never used. He cooked dinner that first night, some elaborate pasta dish with homemade sauce that had been simmering since noon, and we ended up talking until 3 in the morning about everything from our worst job interviews to our irrational fears. Mine was dying alone in my apartment and being found weeks later by the smell. His was people discovering he wasn't as smart as they thought he was. We laughed about how morbid we both were, and when he asked if I wanted to share my Netflix password so he could add his shows to my list, it felt like such a small, practical thing. 2 days later, he suggested we share my Amazon Prime account too, just to save money, and then my Spotify family plan because why pay for 2 subscriptions when we lived in the same place? At first, the comments about my friends seemed protective, even sweet in a twisted way. When Kimberly called Nathan creepy after meeting him at my birthday dinner, he spent an hour analyzing her failed relationships and pointing out how she projected her trust issues onto others. When my coworker Ben started texting me about a new project, Nathan casually mentioned how Ben always found excuses to message female colleagues after hours. Wasn't that interesting? He never told me to stop talking to anyone, just planted these little observations that made me second-guess every interaction. He'd read my texts over my shoulder while I was cooking, not in an obvious way, just standing close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck, asking innocent questions about inside jokes or old stories. One night he borrowed my phone to order takeout because his was dead, and afterward, I noticed he'd gone through my photo albums, hearting random pictures from years ago, leaving his digital fingerprints all over my memories. The banking thing started so innocently, I actually thought it was my idea. We were splitting groceries one evening, and I was struggling with my banking app, trying to send him $37 for his half of the Chinese food. Nathan watched me enter my password wrong twice, laughing at how I always mixed up the last 4 digits, and then offered to just handle our shared expenses through my account to make things easier. He'd transfer his portion once a month, no hassle with constant Venmo requests. He helped me set up the auto-pay for utilities from my checking account, memorizing my login in the process because he was just better with numbers than I was. By April, he was checking my balance for me while I drove, telling me when I could afford to splurge on concert tickets or when I should skip the Target run. He'd joke about my shopping habits, calling me his little debt collector because of all the medical bills I processed at work, while simultaneously questioning every purchase I made that he hadn't approved first. 6 months in, that Thursday in August, everything shifted into something darker, though the buildup had been so gradual I'd missed all the warning signs. I came home early from work with a migraine and found Nathan in my bedroom, not his, sitting at my desk with my laptop open, his external hard drive plugged in, copying files with the focus of a surgeon. When he saw me, he didn't even flinch, just smiled and said he was backing up my photos in case my ancient laptop crashed. Wasn't he thoughtful? But something in his eyes had changed, like a mask had slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. That night, he cooked my favorite meal and acted completely normal, but I noticed he'd changed the password on my laptop, claiming he'd updated it for security and written it down somewhere safe so I wouldn't forget it again. The paper never materialized, and suddenly I needed his permission to access my own digital life. When I told him I wanted to end things 2 weeks later, sitting at our kitchen table with my rehearsed speech about needing space, Nathan pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of every embarrassing message I'd ever sent about my coworkers, my boss, even my mother. Private conversations with Kimberly where I'd vented about my depression. Photos from that bachelorette party in Vegas I'd begged everyone to delete. The draft emails to my ex I'd written but never sent during my weakest moments. He had everything, organized in folders with names like insurance and rainy day fund. And he explained very calmly how unfortunate it would be if my supervisor saw what I really thought about her weight, or if my deeply religious mother discovered those photos from my experimental phase in college. He wasn't threatening me, he clarified, just pointing out how connected everyone was these days, how easy it was for things to accidentally get shared or forwarded to the wrong person. The next morning, Kimberly texted me asking why I'd sent her such a cruel message at midnight, calling her a jealous failure who was sabotaging my happiness. I hadn't sent anything, but there it was in my sent folder, along with similar messages to Ben, my sister, and 3 other close friends, all sent while I was asleep with my phone charging in the living room where Nathan had been up late, working. When I confronted him, he acted confused and concerned, suggesting maybe I'd had too much wine and didn't remember, or maybe I was having those stress-induced blackouts again, the ones I'd mentioned to him in confidence months ago. My friends stopped responding to my apologies, convinced I was in denial about my behavior, and Nathan was right there to comfort me, the only person who understood what I was going through, the only one who hadn't abandoned me when I needed support the most. By September, my credit cards started getting declined, even though I knew I'd paid them. Nathan helped me call the companies, sitting beside me with his hand on my knee, and we discovered someone had changed my payment accounts, redirecting the money to unknown destinations. My credit score plummeted from 750 to 480 in 3 weeks. New credit cards were being opened in my name and maxed out on electronics purchases shipped to addresses I'd never heard of. Nathan spent hours on the phone with banks, pretending to help me resolve the identity theft, while I sat there drowning in paperwork and fraud alerts. He suggested maybe someone at my work had gotten my information, since I dealt with sensitive data all day, or perhaps it was connected to that data breach from the dating app I'd used before meeting him. He held me while I cried about the $7,000 in fraudulent charges, promising we'd get through it together, that he'd loan me money for rent if I needed it, creating a debt that would tie me to him even more. The photos started appearing in October, sent from anonymous email accounts to my workplace. Nothing explicit enough to be criminal, but compromising enough to humiliate me. Photos taken while I was sleeping, changing, existing in what I thought was the privacy of my own home. Photos I didn't even know existed, tagged with comments about my body, my habits, my vulnerabilities. My supervisor called me into her office, concerned about my mental health, suggesting maybe I should take some time off to deal with whatever was happening in my personal life. Nathan was there to drive me home after that meeting, rubbing my back and saying how awful it was that someone would violate my privacy like that, offering to install security cameras in the apartment to catch whoever was doing this to me. The irony was suffocating, but I couldn't prove anything, couldn't point to a single piece of evidence that connected him to any of it, just a sick feeling in my stomach that grew stronger every day. Everything unraveled on a Monday morning when Nathan left for what he said was a job interview in another city. Something about his goodbye felt different, almost gleeful, and the moment his car turned the corner, I ran to his room with a hammer from the kitchen drawer. I destroyed his desktop computer, the one he'd been so protective of, smashing it until the hard drive fell out, and then I grabbed it and drove straight to my cousin's house, the lawyer, the one whose wedding rehearsal had started this nightmare. She helped me connect the drive to her computer, and there it was, everything meticulously organized in folders with my name, subfolder after subfolder of my photos, passwords, personal documents, recorded phone conversations I didn't know existed, even videos of me in my own bedroom taken from angles that made me realize he'd hidden cameras everywhere. My cousin called the police while I sat on her bathroom floor, finally understanding the full scope of what had been happening, finally having the proof I needed. The restraining order went through within 48 hours, and the detective assigned to my case said it was one of the most extensive examples of cyberstalking and identity theft she'd seen. Nathan was arrested at a motel 2 states away, still using my credit card, still logged into my accounts, still sending messages to my employer about my supposed mental breakdown. It took months to untangle the financial mess, longer to rebuild trust with friends who'd been manipulated into abandoning me, and I still sometimes find myself checking corners for hidden cameras in my new apartment across town. But that Monday morning when I picked up that hammer, when I chose to trust my gut over his gaslighting, when I decided to fight back instead of disappearing into the prison he'd built around me, that's when I got my life back. Some days I still wake up at 3 in the morning, heart racing, checking my phone to make sure my passwords are still mine. But at least now when I look in the mirror, I recognize the person staring back at me. My son Brandon kept talking about this gaming headset all his friends had. The kind with LED lights that changed colors and surround sound that supposedly made you feel like you were inside the game. 11 is such a weird age for birthdays. They want to be teenagers but still get excited about cake and presents like little kids. I'd been working extra shifts at the hospital as a radiology tech since December, squirreling away money to get him the headset plus a few other electronics to make his birthday memorable. Single mom guilt is real, especially when you're 37 and starting over in a new place. We'd only been in Madison for 6 months, living in this little house at the end of Birchwood Lane, where the previous owners had left behind a tire swing and a basketball hoop that Brandon used every day after school. I wanted him to be happy here, to forget about the messy divorce and all the arguing he'd witnessed before his dad moved to Phoenix. When the delivery notification popped up on my phone that Wednesday morning, I was getting ready for a 12-hour shift. Brandon was at school, and I knew the package would be sitting on our porch all day, so I texted my neighbor Gloria to ask if she could grab it for me. She was retired, always home, and had been nothing but sweet to us since we moved in. But when I got home that evening, exhausted and ready to hide Brandon's gifts, Gloria told me the strangest thing had happened. The delivery driver had knocked on her door, asking specifically about me, wanting to know if I was home and when I usually got back from work. He'd said there was some issue with the package that needed my signature, even though I'd never requested signature confirmation. Gloria, bless her heart, didn't tell him anything and just said I'd handle it when I got home, but she mentioned he seemed oddly insistent, even waiting in his truck for about 10 minutes after delivering the package before finally leaving. I didn't think much of it at first, honestly. Delivery drivers deal with hundreds of packages, and maybe there really had been some confusion with the order. But then Friday came, and I was homesick with a stomach bug that had been going around the hospital. Brandon was at school, and I was curled up on the couch in my pajamas, drinking ginger tea and watching mindless reality TV, when the doorbell rang around 2 in the afternoon. Through the peephole, I saw the same delivery truck from Wednesday, which I only recognized because it had this distinctive dent on the side panel and a faded company logo that looked like it had been pressure washed too many times. The driver was standing there holding a small package, rocking back and forth on his heels like he was nervous or excited about something. I opened the door just enough to peek out with the chain still on, and he immediately smiled this huge smile, like we were old friends reuniting. He was probably mid-40s, average height, with thinning brown hair and these pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink enough. "Hey there, Catherine," he said, even though I'd never told him my name and my packages were always addressed to K. Sullivan for safety reasons. "Got another delivery for you, but the system's showing some issues with your account. Mind if I come in for just a second to sort it out?" His foot was already positioned close to the door, and he kept glancing past me into the house, trying to see inside. I told him I wasn't feeling well and to just leave the package on the porch, but he insisted it needed a signature and started asking if Brandon was home, mentioning that he'd seen a basketball hoop out back and wondered if my son played for any local teams. That's when every alarm bell in my head started going off. I told him firmly to leave the package or take it back to the distribution center, then closed and locked the door while he was still talking. Through the window, I watched him stand on my porch for another 5 minutes, walking around to peer through different windows, even going so far as to cup his hands against the glass of my living room window. He eventually left, but not before walking completely around my house, and I saw him take pictures of my backyard with his phone. I immediately called the delivery company to file a complaint, but they said they had no record of any delivery scheduled for my address that day. They also claimed that none of their drivers matched the description I gave, and the truck number I'd memorized from the side didn't exist in their system. Saturday morning, things got worse. Brandon had spent the night at his friend Justin's house for a sleepover, which I was grateful for in hindsight. Around 6 in the morning, I heard something outside my bedroom window, a scratching sound like branches against the siding, except we didn't have any trees on that side of the house. When I carefully pulled back the curtain, I nearly screamed. The delivery driver was standing in my side yard pressed against the house, trying to jimmy open my bedroom window with what looked like a paint scraper. He was wearing regular clothes this time, jeans and a dark hoodie, but I recognized his face instantly. The second we made eye contact, he didn't run or look startled. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the window and mouthed the words, "Just wanna talk," with this calm expression that made my whole body go cold with fear. I grabbed my phone to call 911, and only then did he back away, walking casually toward the street like he was just out for an early morning stroll. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but of course he was long gone by then. 2 officers, a young woman who looked fresh from the academy, and an older guy with a gray mustache who seemed to take everything I said with a grain of salt, walked around my property and took notes. They found fresh tool marks on 3 different windows and boot prints in the flower bed my landlord had just mulched. The younger officer seemed genuinely concerned and suggested I file for a restraining order, but the older one kept asking if maybe I'd had a disagreement with a delivery driver about a damaged package, or if I was sure I hadn't invited anyone over and forgotten. He actually asked if I was taking any medications that might affect my memory, which made me want to scream. They said they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood, but without a name or license plate, there wasn't much else they could do. I spent the rest of Saturday installing extra locks on all the windows and doors, those metal bars that prevent them from sliding open more than a few inches. Gloria came over with her husband Frank to help, and Frank even installed motion sensor lights around the house that he had left over from his own security upgrade last year. I picked Brandon up from Justin's house that evening and tried to act normal, making his favorite spaghetti and meatballs for dinner and letting him play video games longer than usual. but I couldn't stop checking the windows, couldn't stop jumping at every car that drove by. Around midnight, after Brandon was asleep, I sat in the dark living room with a baseball bat across my lap and every light outside blazing. That's when I heard it, the distinctive rattle of someone trying the back door handle, followed by the scraping sound of metal on metal, like someone working a crowbar into the door frame. I called 911 immediately, whispering to the dispatcher while creeping toward Brandon's room. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst through my chest, and I could taste copper in my mouth from biting my tongue. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay on the line, that officers were 3 minutes out. But 3 minutes feels like 3 hours when someone's trying to break into your house. The scraping got more aggressive, more desperate, and then I heard wood splintering. I grabbed Brandon, who woke up confused and groggy, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom, the only room in the house with no windows and a door that locked from the inside. Brandon kept asking what was happening, why we were hiding, and I had to cover his mouth with my hand when we heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. The bathroom doorknob turned once, twice, then rattled violently. "Catherine, I know you're in there," the voice said, and it was definitely him. But his tone had changed completely from that fake friendly delivery driver act. Now it was flat, empty, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized. "I've been watching you for weeks, not just since Wednesday. You order a lot of packages, Catherine. Makes it easy to figure out your schedule, your habits. Single mom, works long shifts. Kid goes to Jefferson Elementary and gets picked up at 3:15 every day, except Wednesdays when he has basketball practice until 5. He knew everything, had been studying us like we were specimens in a jar, and the worst part was how calm he sounded while saying it. Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the door, probably his shoulder, and Brandon started crying, pressing his face into my chest while I held him tight and prayed for the police to hurry. The sirens came like angels singing, getting louder and louder until they were right outside, and suddenly the pounding on the door stopped. I heard him curse, just one word under his breath, then rapid footsteps running through my house, the back door slamming open so hard it bounced off the wall. The police found me and Brandon still huddled in the bathroom 20 minutes later. After they'd cleared the house and the surrounding area, they caught him 3 blocks away, trying to hide behind a dumpster at the Methodist church, still carrying the crowbar and a backpack full of zip ties, duct tape, and a stun gun. His name was Leonard Morse, 43 years old, and he'd been fired from 4 different delivery companies in the past 2 years for harassment and stalking complaints. The detective who interviewed me later said they found notebooks in his apartment with detailed information about 12 different women, all single mothers who frequently ordered packages online, complete with work schedules, children's names, and floor plans of their homes sketched from memory. Brandon and I stayed with Gloria for a week after that, until I could find us a new place on the other side of town, a second-floor apartment with a security system and neighbors on all sides. I stopped ordering things online for almost a year, driving to actual stores even when it meant dragging Brandon along after long shifts, because every delivery truck that passed made my chest tighten. Leonard Morse got 15 years for attempted kidnapping, breaking and entering, and stalking, though the prosecutor said he'd probably be out in 7 with good behavior. I still check the Wisconsin Department of Corrections website sometimes, making sure he's still locked up, counting down the years until 2032 when he might get released. Brandon's 16 now, taller than me and protective in a way that breaks my heart a little, because I know he remembers that night, remembers hiding in that bathroom while a stranger tried to break down the door. He still gets his birthday presents in person now, no deliveries, and I always let him open them early because waiting for special days doesn't feel as important as it used to. Not when you've learned how quickly normal life can turn into a nightmare. My roommate Craig had been nagging me about the dating apps for months, saying I needed to get back out there after Melissa and I split the previous fall. 29 and suddenly single after 6 years. I felt like I'd forgotten how to even talk to women who weren't already part of my established social circle. Craig kept his laptop open on the kitchen counter that Wednesday evening, showing me his matches while I heated up leftover Chinese food, telling me how easy it was, how he'd gone on 3 dates just that week. I downloaded the app mostly to shut him up, figuring I'd delete it after a few days of mindless swiping. My profile took all of 5 minutes to set up: 3 recent photos from a buddy's birthday party, a generic bio about liking craft beer and hiking, and my neighborhood listed as Lincoln Park even though technically I lived closer to Lakeview. Ashley appeared in my matches around 10 that night, after Craig had left to meet some girl at a wine bar downtown. Her profile stood out because she'd actually written complete sentences in her bio, not just a string of emojis, and her Instagram handle like most of them. She worked in medical billing, had moved here from Grand Rapids 3 months ago, and her second photo showed her at what looked like Wrigley Field wearing a Tigers cap, which made me laugh. We matched immediately, and she messaged within minutes, making a joke about how brave I was to post a photo wearing a Cubs jersey in my profile, considering how terrible they'd been last season. The conversation flowed naturally from there, both of us typing paragraphs instead of one-word responses, sharing apartment hunting horror stories and comparing notes on which neighborhoods had the best takeout spots. By Friday afternoon, we'd exchanged probably 200 messages, and I found myself checking my phone between meetings at work, actually excited to see her replies. She told me about her job at Northwestern Medicine, how she'd taken it mainly to get out of Michigan after a messy breakup, and how she'd been living in this tiny studio in Uptown that supposedly had a lake view if you stood on a chair and craned your neck just right. I told her about my job doing IT support for a logistics company, boring but stable, and how Craig was actually my 3rd roommate in 2 years because the previous guys kept moving in with girlfriends. She suggested we should meet up soon, maybe grab coffee over the weekend, but then mentioned she had to work Saturday and had plans with a coworker Sunday afternoon. When I half-jokingly said we could just skip the coffee shop awkwardness and I could make us drinks at my place, she responded immediately with 3 laughing emojis and said that sounded perfect. Saturday around 7, she texted saying she was exhausted from work but still wanted to hang out if I was free. Craig was gone for the weekend, visiting his parents in Milwaukee, so I had the whole apartment to myself. I actually cleaned for the first time in weeks, shoving dirty laundry into closets, wiping down the kitchen counters, even lighting one of those overpriced candles Melissa had left behind. Ashley said she could come by around 8:30, just needed to stop home first to change out of her scrubs. I made a quick liquor store run, grabbing decent vodka and some mixers, trying not to overthink what kind of drinks would seem impressive but not trying too hard. She texted when she was in an Uber heading over, then again when she was outside, and I remember checking my reflection in the microwave door before buzzing her in. When I opened the door, Ashley looked exactly like her photos, which honestly surprised me after some of the catfishing stories Craig had told me. She wore dark jeans and this green sweater that made her hazel eyes stand out, and she'd brought a bottle of wine even though I'd said I had everything covered. Her smile seemed nervous but genuine, and she made this little self-deprecating joke about how she'd gotten lost in my building's hallways for 5 minutes because all the doors looked identical. I gave her the quick apartment tour, apologizing for the outdated kitchen and the weird stain on the living room carpet that had been there since before I moved in. She said it was way nicer than her place, that at least I had a separate bedroom and actual furniture that matched. We settled in the living room, and I started making Moscow mules while she browsed through my bookshelf, commenting on how she'd loved the same thriller series I had displayed on the top shelf. We were maybe 15 minutes into conversation, just getting past that initial awkwardness where you're both trying to figure out if the chemistry translates from messages to real life, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Not unusual for a Saturday night, except these stopped right outside my door. Then came this light knock, almost like someone testing if the door was properly closed. Ashley was mid-sentence, telling me about some crazy patient billing dispute from earlier that day when the doorknob started turning. I definitely locked it after she came in, had this habit of always double-checking ever since a drunk neighbor had wandered into the wrong apartment a few months back. The knob jiggled harder, more insistent, and then stopped. Ashley had gone quiet, looking at me with this confused expression, probably wondering why I'd suddenly stopped responding to her story. Before I could say anything, explained that sometimes people got confused about which unit was theirs. The door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. 2 men rushed in, both wearing black ski masks that covered everything except their eyes and mouths. The bigger one, probably 6'3" and built like he lived at the gym, immediately grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall so hard that the framed poster behind me shattered. The smaller guy, wiry and moving with this twitchy energy like he was on something, had a knife that caught the light from my kitchen as he waved it around. Ashley hadn't screamed, hadn't moved, just sat there on my couch holding her drink with both hands, like she was afraid of spilling it on the carpet. The big guy's grip on my throat made it impossible to breathe, let alone speak, and black spots started dancing at the edges of my vision. His breath smelled like cigarettes and energy drinks as he leaned in close, telling me to stay calm, that they just wanted my wallet, my phone, whatever cash I had lying around. The smaller one had already started ransacking my entertainment center, throwing game controllers and DVDs onto the floor. And that's when I noticed Ashley had set down her drink and was calmly pulling something from her purse. For this insane moment, I thought maybe she had pepper spray or was going to call 911, but instead she pulled out a folded piece of paper and started reading off details about my apartment that she couldn't have known from our 15 minutes together. She knew which bedroom was mine versus Craig's, mentioned the MacBook Pro I kept in my closet that I'd bought for freelance work, even knew about the emergency cash I kept in a coffee tin above the refrigerator, something I'd never told anyone except Craig. Her voice had changed completely, lost all that nervous sweetness from earlier, became flat and businesslike like she was reading a grocery list. The big guy loosened his grip just enough for me to gasp for air, and I tried to process what was happening, tried to make sense of why this woman I'd been flirting with for 3 days was now directing these men through my apartment like she'd drawn them a map. She stood up then, walked over to where I was pinned against the wall, and looked me straight in the eyes while explaining to the men that my roommate kept a PlayStation 5 in his room that they shouldn't miss. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours watching them systematically strip my apartment of everything valuable, while Ashley supervised like some kind of twisted project manager. She kept checking her phone, probably tracking how long they'd been there, occasionally reminding them to check specific spots I'd never even mentioned in our conversations. The smaller guy found my laptop bag in the bedroom closet, exactly where she told him to look, while the bigger one emptied my wallet and pocketed my watch, a graduation gift from my dad that I'd stupidly mentioned in one of our messages when she'd asked about the vintage Omega in my profile photo. They made me unlock my phone and transfer money from my banking apps, Ashley standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same vanilla scent that had seemed so appealing when she'd first walked in. She watched me enter my passwords with this detached curiosity, like she was studying my typing patterns for future reference. When the transfer limits kicked in after $2,000, she just shrugged and told the big guy to take the phone anyway, that they could probably get a few hundred for it even locked. Right before they left, Ashley did something that still makes me nauseous when I think about it. She leaned down to where I was slumped against the wall, my throat raw and bruised from being choked, and smoothed my hair back from my forehead with this gentle, almost tender gesture. She whispered that I seemed like a really nice guy, that she was sorry it had to be me, but that I should know I wasn't the first, and definitely wouldn't be the last. The 2 men were already at the door with trash bags full of my belongings, and she grabbed the bottle of wine she'd brought, saying something about how it would be a waste to leave it. Then she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I probably shouldn't bother calling the cops because Ashley wasn't even her real name, and good luck explaining to them how I'd invited a stranger from a dating app to my apartment after knowing her for 3 days. The smaller guy laughed at that, this high-pitched giggle that sounded unhinged, and then they were gone, leaving my door wide open to the hallway where I could hear my neighbor's TV playing some reality show, the laugh track feeling like mockery. I did call the cops anyway, once I could stand without the room spinning, once I'd managed to close and barricade my door with a kitchen chair because the lock was completely destroyed. 2 officers showed up about an hour later, a younger guy who kept calling me sir, and an older woman who looked like she'd heard this exact story 100 times before. They took photos of my bruised throat, documented what was stolen, and the woman officer asked me to show her Ashley's dating profile on my laptop. Except when I borrowed Craig's phone to check, the profile had already been deleted. All our messages, gone. Like she'd never existed at all. The officer just nodded, said this was the 4th case like this she'd seen this month. That these rings were getting more sophisticated, using real photos of women who had no idea their images were being used to catfish lonely guys into robbery setups. She gave me a case number, said a detective would follow up, but we both knew nothing would come of it. The younger officer tried to be encouraging, mentioned something about checking pawn shops for my electronics, but his partner shot him a look that shut him up quick. Craig came back Sunday night to find me sitting in our ransacked apartment with a baseball bat next to the couch, jumping every time someone walked past our door. I told him everything, showed him the police report, the bruises on my neck that had turned this sick purple-yellow color. He was furious, kept saying we should go to the media, post warnings on social media, do something to stop these people from doing this to anyone else. But what would I say? That I'd been stupid enough to invite a stranger to our apartment? That I'd been so desperate for connection that I'd ignored every safety rule I'd ever known? Craig helped me change the locks, install a doorbell camera, even got one of those doorstop alarms that screams if anyone tries to force the door. We told our friends I'd been mugged, which was easier than explaining the whole humiliating truth. The detective did call, once, said they'd found similar cases spanning 3 states, that the ring appeared to use multiple women and probably moved cities every few months. He suggested I keep an eye on my credit report, change all my passwords, all the stuff you do after identity theft. As if the stolen money and electronics were what kept me up at night, not the memory of Ashley's fingers in my hair, telling me I seemed nice. 6 months later, I still haven't been on a single date. Craig stopped asking about it after the 3rd time I had a panic attack when he suggested downloading a different app, one with better security features or video verification or whatever useless safeguards they advertise now. I work from home permanently now. Told my boss it was for productivity reasons, but really it's because I can't handle being in public spaces where I don't know everyone. Every brunette woman I see makes my chest tighten. Every vanilla perfume in the elevator sends me straight back to that Saturday night. My therapist says it's PTSD. That violation of trust creates deeper wounds than physical violence, that healing isn't linear. She keeps asking me to talk about how I felt when Ashley touched my hair, that moment of twisted intimacy in the middle of being robbed, but I can't explain it properly. How do you tell someone that the worst part wasn't the knife or the choking or losing thousands of dollars, but that for 3 days I'd genuinely believed someone wanted to know me, had stayed up texting until 3 in the morning, feeling like maybe I'd finally found something real. My sister's wedding happened last month, and I went alone, made up some story about how my girlfriend couldn't make it because of a work emergency. The lies come so easily now, little fiction band-aids over the truth that I'm too broken to trust anyone new. Sometimes I wonder if Ashley, or whatever her real name is, ever thinks about the guys she's destroyed. If she remembers our conversations about hiking trails we'd never visit, restaurants we'd never try, that stupid joke about the Cubs that made me think she actually gave a damn. The detective called one last time in September, said they'd arrested someone in Ohio who might be connected, but the woman they caught wasn't talking and looked nothing like Ashley's photos anyway. He said I might be called to testify if it went to trial, but we both knew I couldn't identify anyone except those eyes above the ski masks. I thanked him, deleted his number, tried to pretend that chapter was closed even though I still sleep with that baseball bat under my bed, still triple-check the locks, still feel my pulse race when my phone buzzes with any notification from an unknown number. Nobody really thinks about how vulnerable you are until your car dies 40 miles from anywhere that matters. Mine gave up on a Tuesday night in February, just past 11, on that stretch of Highway 47 where cell towers become suggestions rather than guarantees. 29 and divorced 6 months prior, I'd been driving back from visiting my sister Diane in Riverside, trying to beat the storm system the weather apps kept warning about. My Corolla had been making that grinding noise for weeks, the one my ex-husband used to say meant the transmission was going, but I kept putting off the mechanic visit because rent was due and groceries don't buy themselves. When the engine finally seized, all I could do was coast to the shoulder and watch the temperature gauge spike into the red, while something under the hood hissed like an angry cat. My phone showed 1 bar, sometimes 2 if I held it just right, and calling A meant sitting on hold for God knows how long with a connection that kept cutting out every 30 seconds. That's when I started searching for local towing services, scrolling through results that all seemed to be 30+ miles away. Most were closed, their websites showing business hours that ended at 6 or 8 in the evening. Then I found quick response towing, buried on the second page of results, claiming 24-hour emergency service for the exact area I was stranded in. No fancy website, just a basic page with a phone number and a contact form where you could drop a pin for your location. 0 reviews on Google, nothing on Yelp, but at that point, with sleet starting to tap against my windshield and my phone battery at 37%, I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky. The form was simple, just boxes for your name, phone number, and that location pin, plus a checkbox agreeing to their terms of service that I didn't bother reading because who reads those when you're sitting alone on a dark highway with ice forming on your windows? I typed everything in with numb fingers, hit submit, and got an automated response saying someone would contact me within 15 minutes. 7 minutes later, my phone rang from a blocked number, and this voice, smooth and professional but somehow practiced, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized, told me his name was Mike, and he'd be there in about 40 minutes. He asked me to confirm my exact location twice, had me describe my car down to the color of the interior, and then said something that made my neck prickle, asked if I was alone or if anyone was waiting for me at my destination. I lied and said my roommate was expecting me, even though I lived alone in a studio apartment where the only thing waiting was leftover Chinese food and Netflix. Mike just said, "Good to know," in this flat way that made me wonder why he'd asked in the first place, then told me to stay in my vehicle with the doors locked until he arrived, which seemed like obvious advice, but the way he said it sounded more like an instruction than a suggestion. After he hung up, I sat there watching the clock on my dashboard, which was the only thing still working properly, and noticed something weird about that website when I went back to look at it. The contact form was gone, replaced with just a message saying they were at capacity for the night. How could a 24-hour towing service be at capacity, and why would they remove the form right after I'd used it, like they didn't want anyone else finding them? 35 minutes passed before I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, high beams cutting through the sleet that had turned into proper snow by then, and my first thought was relief until I realized it wasn't a tow truck pulling up behind me. It was a white van, the kind contractors use. No company logos or identifying marks, just rust spots around the wheel wells and a cracked windshield held together with clear tape. The driver's door opened and this guy stepped out wearing coveralls that might have been blue once, but were now the color of old motor oil, and he had one of those baseball caps pulled low enough that I couldn't see his eyes properly in the dark. He walked toward my car with this unhurried pace, carrying a toolbox in one hand and what looked like a Slim Jim in the other, and that's when I noticed he hadn't parked like a tow truck driver would, didn't angle his vehicle to protect mine from traffic, just stopped directly behind me, blocking me in. He tapped on my window with the Slim Jim, not his knuckles, and when I cracked it open just an inch, he leaned down and said, "You must be Amanda," except I'd never given them my name, just put A. Thompson on the form because that's what I always did with online stuff. His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes and something metallic, and up close I could see his eyes now, this pale gray color that didn't blink enough, just stared while he explained that the tow truck was meeting us at the shop because of the weather, that he was here to get my car started so I could follow him there. I asked to see some ID and he laughed. Not a real laugh, but that sound people make when they're buying time. Then pulled out a laminated card that could have been printed at home, blurry photo and all, with the name Mike Garrett and that same quick response towing logo from the website. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep that window up, but he was already walking around to my hood, popping it open with the Slim Jim like he'd done it 100 times before, and I could hear him moving things around in there, metal scraping against metal. Tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't connect. Just gave me that 3-tone error sound. And when I looked at my phone, the signal was completely gone. Not even emergency calls only. Just no service, like the towers had vanished. Mike appeared at my window again, tapping harder this time, saying he needed me to try starting the engine while he did something under the hood, and his other hand was resting on my door handle, testing it, finding it locked. He kept talking, voice getting flatter, telling me we were wasting time, that the weather was getting worse, that my roommate must be worried, emphasizing that last part like he was reminding me of my own lie. I turned the key just to make him step away from my door, and the engine actually turned over, sputtered, then caught, running rough but running. He slammed the hood down and walked back to my window, told me to follow him to the shop about 15 miles up the road, said he'd go slow because of the snow, and then added something that made my whole body go rigid. Said, "Don't worry about your phone, Amanda. Service gets better once we're moving." I hadn't mentioned my phone not working, hadn't touched it while he could see me, and the way he said my actual name this time, drawing it out like he was tasting it, made me realize this wasn't about towing my car anywhere. When he walked back to his van, I did the only thing that made sense, threw the car in drive and floored it, feeling the tires spin on the icy road before catching, and in my rearview mirror I saw him standing there in the snow, not running back to his van, not even looking surprised, just watching me drive away with his hands in his pockets like he had all the time in the world. The engine was knocking bad, temperature gauge creeping up again, but I kept my foot down, taking the curves faster than I should have in that weather, checking my mirrors every few seconds, expecting to see those high beams coming up fast behind me. 5 miles later, the engine started missing, coughing like it was choking on something, and I knew whatever he'd done under that hood wasn't to fix anything. The car died completely just as I crested a hill, and I coasted down the other side, wrestling with the suddenly heavy steering, pumping brakes that barely responded without the power assist. I managed to get it onto a pull-off near a cluster of trees, grabbed my purse and phone and started running through the snow toward what looked like lights in the distance. Maybe a gas station or rest stop, anything with people and working phones. That's when I heard his van coming, not racing, just maintaining that steady speed like he knew exactly where I'd broken down, and I ducked into the trees, crouching behind a fallen trunk as those headlights swept across the pull-off where my car sat dark and empty. He stopped, got out, walked around my Corolla twice, even opened the driver's door and looked inside, and I could see him clearly in the dome light, that same unhurried way of moving, checking his watch like he was keeping to some schedule. Then he did something that made me bite my hand to keep from gasping, pulled out a second phone, not his, and I recognized my phone case, the purple one with the rhinestones my sister gave me for my birthday. Except my phone was in my pocket, so how did he have an identical one? He typed something on it, the screen lighting his face from below, making those gray eyes look silver, then tossed it onto my passenger seat and closed the door, walking back to his van without even glancing toward the trees where I was hiding. I stayed frozen behind that log for another 10 minutes after his taillights disappeared, snow soaking through my jeans, teeth chattering so hard I thought he might hear them if he was still out there somewhere watching. When I finally stood up, my legs were so numb I had to grab tree branches to keep from falling, and I stumbled through the woods parallel to the road, afraid to walk on the pavement in case he came back. The lights I'd seen turned out to be a truck stop about a mile away, one of those 24-hour places with the bright fluorescent glow that never looked so welcoming. I burst through the doors looking like something out of a horror movie, covered in snow and pine needles, mascara running down my face, And the clerk, this kid maybe 19 with gauged ears and a name tag that said Dustin, immediately asked if I needed him to call the police. While we waited for the state troopers, I sat in the break room wrapped in a blanket Dustin found somewhere, drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil but was hot, and that's all that mattered. My phone suddenly had full bars again, and the missed calls started coming through, 17 of them, all from numbers I didn't recognize, all within the last hour. The voicemails were worse, just breathing at first, then Mike's voice, calm as ever, saying things like, "Amanda, you left your lights on," and "Your engine's still warm, you couldn't have gone far," and the last one, the one that made Dustin take the phone away from me. "Your roommate's worried, says you never came home. Maybe we should file a missing persons report." The trooper who showed up, Officer Reeves, took my statement while his partner drove out to check on my car. And when they came back, they had that duplicate phone in an evidence bag, said it had messages on it from my number to various people saying I was heading to California to start fresh, not to worry about me. Classic runaway scenario they'd seen before. Officer Reeves ran the quick response towing name through their system and found nothing. No business license, no registered company, nothing at all. And when they tried to pull up that website on his patrol car's laptop, it was gone. Just a dead link like it never existed. They did find something else, though. 3 other reports from the last 2 years. Women whose cars had broken down on remote stretches of highway, who'd called for help from services that didn't exist when police went looking later, except those women had actually gotten in the vehicles with their supposed rescuers. 2 were found weeks later in different states, no memory of what happened after accepting the ride. And 1, a teacher from Tucson named Carol Mendez, was still missing. Her car found abandoned with her phone on the passenger seat, showing messages about starting a new life in Mexico. Officer Reeves said they'd been trying to track this guy for months, that he used different names, different fake companies. But the pattern was always the same. Targeting women alone on isolated roads, using some kind of signal jammer to kill cell service, creating false trails with planted phones. They kept my phone as evidence after downloading everything from it, gave me a flip phone to use temporarily, and drove me to a motel for the night since my car needed to be processed, and I was in no shape to drive anyway. I didn't sleep, just sat on that scratchy motel bedspread watching headlights pass through the thin curtains, jumping every time I heard a vehicle slow down outside. 2 weeks later, they arrested a man named Gary Holston at a rest stop near Flagstaff. Found him approaching a woman whose car had mysteriously stopped working after she'd responded to a pop-up ad for emergency roadside assistance. In his van, they found signal jamming equipment, dozens of cheap phones with cases bought to match potential victims' phones, and a laptop with templates for fake towing websites that could be created and deleted within hours. He's awaiting trial now, charged with kidnapping, fraud, and a list of other crimes they're still sorting through. And I had to identify him through one-way glass. Those same pale gray eyes staring at nothing. That same unhurried way of moving like he had all the time in the world, even in custody. I still check every towing service 3 times before calling. Still feel my chest tighten when I see white vans in my rearview mirror. And I keep Itoaile, 2 other roadside services, and my sister on speed dial. Because you never really know who's going to answer when you're desperate enough to call for help from strangers on the internet. February in Pennsylvania gets dark around 5:30, but that particular Friday, I didn't leave the warehouse until almost 11. Inventory season meant 14-hour shifts, and my supervisor had just quit, dumping everything on those of us still hanging on for the overtime pay. My wife texted around 9, asking if I wanted her to leave dinner in the microwave, and I told her to just go to bed, that I'd grab something on the way. By the time I finally clocked out and started the 40-minute drive home, my eyes felt like sandpaper, and all I could think about was crawling into bed next to her. Route 22 stretched ahead of me, nothing but darkness and the occasional 18-wheeler passing in the opposite direction. About halfway home, Right where the road cuts through that empty stretch between Bethel and Fredericksburg, I spotted the neon sign for a fuel-and-go station. My eyelids were getting heavy, that dangerous kind of heavy where you catch yourself drifting toward the rumble strip, so I figured coffee would be smart. Plus, my gas gauge showed less than a quarter tank, enough to make it home but cutting it close. I pulled off into the nearly empty lot. Just one other car parked near the edge by the dumpsters. Some beat-up Chevy Malibu with duct tape holding the bumper on. The fluorescent lights above the pumps flickered and buzzed, casting everything in that harsh white glow that makes you look sick even when you're not. Inside, the place had that typical rest stop smell. Burnt coffee mixed with industrial cleaner and something vaguely rotten from the hot dog roller that probably hadn't been cleaned since Christmas. Behind the counter sat a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, face buried in his phone, barely glancing up when the door chime announced my entrance. I headed straight for the coffee station in the back corner, grabbed the largest cup they had, and started filling it with whatever sludge had been sitting in the pot since God knows when. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, way too close for comfort in an otherwise empty store. "Long night." The voice came from directly over my shoulder, and I turned to find this guy standing maybe 6 inches from me, close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his jacket. He had one of those faces that could have been anywhere from 35 to 50, weathered and lined, with pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink. His hair was slicked back with too much gel, and he wore a faded denim jacket over what looked like mechanics' coveralls, though they were too clean to belong to someone who actually worked on cars. He smiled, showing teeth that were surprisingly white and straight, the kind of smile that should have been friendly, but somehow made my chest tighten instead. "Yeah, just heading home from work," I mumbled, taking a step sideways to put some distance between us while I snapped a lid on my coffee. But he moved with me, maintaining that uncomfortable closeness like we were dancing some weird convenience store waltz. "You know, I noticed you pulling in," he said, his voice carrying this oddly cheerful tone that didn't match the hour or the setting. "That's a nice Accord you got there. What is it, 2016? 2017? I used to have one just like it, same color and everything. Silver pearl metallic, right?" The specificity made me pause because he was exactly right, down to the paint name Honda used. I just nodded, trying to move toward the register, but he kept talking, following me step for step. "Here's the thing, though," he continued, pulling out a pack of Marlboros and tapping one against his palm, even though you obviously couldn't smoke inside. "These models, they got a problem with the valve stems, especially in cold weather like this. The rubber degrades, starts letting air out real slow, so slow you don't even notice until boom, you got a flat on the highway doing 70. Happened to my cousin just last month. Rolled his car right into a drainage ditch out near Harrisburg. They had to cut him out with the jaws of life." He shook his head like he was personally devastated by this story. "Hey, when's the last time you had someone check those stems? Because I'm telling you, brother, driving on Route 22 this late with bad valve stems, that's just asking for trouble." I paid for my coffee while he kept rambling about tire pressure and road safety, the kid behind the counter never once looking up from his phone during the entire transaction. The stranger followed me right to the door, still talking, and when I pushed it open, he grabbed the handle from behind me. "Let me take a quick look at those tires for you," he said, already moving toward my car before I could respond. "Won't take but a second, and then you'll know for sure you're safe to drive home." "Come on, what's 30 seconds if it saves your life?" Something about the way he said that last part, the way his voice dropped just a fraction, made me want to get in my car and leave immediately. But he was already crouched by my front driver's side tire, running his hands along the rubber like he was reading Braille. "See, look at this," he called out, waving me over with one hand while the other stayed pressed against the tire. "Feel right here. You can actually feel where the rubber's starting to separate from the stem. That's classic cold weather damage. And this one too." He moved to the rear tire, making a clicking sound with his tongue. "Man, all 4 of these are accidents waiting to happen. Good thing you stopped here tonight, real lucky if you ask me." He stood up, wiping his hands on his coveralls, even though they hadn't gotten dirty, and gave me that unsettling smile again. Tell you what, I got a repair kit in my car, professional grade stuff from when I worked at a shop in Allentown. Let me grab it. I'll check the pressure and seal those stems right up for you. Won't charge you anything, just helping out a fellow driver. Before I could tell him no thanks, he was already jogging toward that beat-up Malibu, keys jingling in his hand. I stood there in the cold, coffee getting lukewarm in my hand, watching him pop his trunk and start rummaging around. The smart move would have been to get in my car right then and drive away, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe just social conditioning about not being rude to someone trying to help. He came back carrying a red toolbox that looked brand new, not a scratch or dent on it, which seemed odd for something supposedly from his mechanic days. "This'll just take a few minutes," he said, kneeling back down by my front tire. "Why don't you go inside where it's warm? Maybe grab yourself a snack or something. No point in both of us freezing out here." That's when I heard it. A soft hissing sound coming from my rear passenger tire. I walked around to look, and my heart started hammering against my ribs. There was a slash in the sidewall about 3 inches long, fresh enough that I could still see the white threading inside the rubber pulling apart. I spun around to confront him, but he was already standing right behind me, still holding that smile, but his eyes had gone completely flat, like a shark's. "Would you look at that?" he said, his voice different now, slower and more deliberate. "Must have happened when you pulled in. These parking lots, you never know what kind of debris is lying around. Glass, metal scraps, all kinds of hazards." He took a step closer, and I noticed for the first time how much bigger he was than me, at least 3 inches taller and probably 40 pounds heavier. "Good thing I'm here to help you out, right? Because calling a tow truck this time of night, out here in the middle of nowhere, that's gonna take hours and cost you what, $300–400? I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen as I tried to dial 911, but he moved faster than I expected for someone his size. His hand clamped down on my wrist, not violent, just firm enough to make his point. "Now, why would you want to call the cops?" he asked, that fake friendly tone creeping back into his voice. "We're just two guys helping each other out here. Besides, what are you gonna tell them? That someone's offering to fix your tire? They got real crimes to worry about." He let go of my wrist but stayed close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. "Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna let me give you a ride wherever you need to go. My car's running fine and I know these roads like the back of my hand. We'll leave your car here, come back for it in the morning when the tire shop opens. Simple as that." The way he said it, like it was already decided, like I didn't have a choice, that's what finally snapped me out of my paralysis. I threw the hot coffee right in his face and ran, not toward my useless car, but toward the store, screaming for the kid behind the counter to call the police. The stranger cursed and stumbled backward, pawing at his eyes, and I burst through the door so hard it slammed against the wall. The kid actually looked up from his phone, startled, and I yelled that there was a man outside who'd slashed my tires and was trying to force me into his car. To his credit, the kid immediately picked up the store phone and dialed 911, then reached under the counter and pulled out a baseball bat. "We get weirdos sometimes," he said, moving toward the door to lock it. Through the window, we could see the stranger getting into his Malibu, and for one terrifying moment, I thought he might ram it right through the storefront, but he just sat there for maybe 30 seconds, watching us, before pulling out of the lot and disappearing down Route 22. The state police showed up about 15 minutes later, took my statement, and checked the security footage, which clearly showed the guy following me around the store and then doing something to my tires, though the angle wasn't good enough to see the actual slashing. They found the knife he'd used thrown in the grass by the air pump, a folding blade with a worn wooden handle. The cops said they'd seen this before, guys who disable cars at remote stops and then offer rides to stranded motorists, especially women, though I was apparently an unusual target. They never found the Malibu or the man, even though they put out an alert with the plate number I'd memorized. The tow truck driver who came to get my car told me I was lucky, that just 6 months earlier they'd found an abandoned car at a rest stop near Hershey with slashed tires, and the owner never turned up. My insurance covered the new tires, and I drove home around 4 in the morning to find my wife awake and worried sick. These days, I don't care how tired I am or how empty the tank gets. I don't stop at rest stops after dark anymore. I'll drive on fumes all the way home before I risk meeting another helpful stranger with a brand new toolbox and clean mechanics coveralls. Rent in Portland had gotten insane by 2018, and my fiancé, Josh, and I were drowning. We'd bought our little 2-bedroom house on Hawthorne Street the year before, right after I finished my veterinary tech certification, thinking we'd scored the deal of a lifetime. Turns out the mortgage plus utilities was way more than we'd calculated, especially with Josh still paying off student loans from his engineering degree. By January, we were having those tense conversations over dinner where neither of us wanted to admit we were scared. The spare bedroom sat there, mocking us with its empty space and wasted potential. That's when Josh brought up the idea of renting it out, just temporarily, until we got our heads above water. I wasn't thrilled about sharing our space with a stranger, but when I checked our bank account that night and saw we had maybe $300 to last until my next paycheck, I knew we didn't have much choice. We posted the ad on Craigslist on a Thursday morning in early February. Nothing fancy, just basic info about the room, shared bathroom, kitchen privileges, $700 a month plus split utilities. My best friend Vanessa called me that same afternoon, practically yelling through the phone about how we should be using one of those verified roommate apps instead. She went on this whole rant about background checks and references, and how Craigslist was basically asking for trouble. Josh's coworker told him the same thing, said his cousin had used some service that vetted everyone thoroughly. But those platforms took a cut of the rent, sometimes up to 15%, and they had all these fees and waiting periods. We didn't have time for that. We needed someone now, and we needed that full $700, not $600 after some company took their share. I remember Josh saying we'd be careful. We'd meet anyone interested in person, check their ID, trust our gut. It sounded reasonable at the time. People found roommates on Craigslist all the time, right? How bad could it really be? We got maybe a dozen responses in the first few days, most of them weird or obviously not a good fit. One guy sent a 3-paragraph essay about his ferret collection. Another woman wanted to know if we'd be okay with her practicing her craft in the common areas, which I'm pretty sure meant witchcraft or something equally awkward for a shared living space. Then on Sunday night, we got an email from someone named Vincent Hayes. Short, polite, professional. He said he was new to Portland, working remotely as a software consultant, needed a quiet place to work and sleep, didn't party, didn't smoke. He attached a photo of a driver's license from Pennsylvania, included references from 2 previous landlords, and offered to pay the first month plus deposit in cash if we could meet soon. Everything about it seemed perfect, almost too perfect. But Josh pointed out that we'd been complaining about flaky responses all weekend. Here was someone serious, ready to commit. We emailed him back within 20 minutes and set up a meeting for Monday evening. Vincent showed up exactly on time, 6 o'clock, knocking softly on our front door. He was probably in his early 40s, average height, thinning brown hair, wearing a neat button-down shirt and khakis like he'd just gotten off a Zoom call. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, and he had this calm, almost forgettable presence about him. The kind of person you'd pass on the street and never remember 5 minutes later. He complimented our house, said it had good energy, asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and public transportation. When Josh showed him the bedroom, Vincent nodded approvingly, ran his hand along the window frame, commented on how much natural light it got. He mentioned he'd be working mostly from his room, wouldn't be cooking much, mostly ate takeout or meal prep. We asked about his job and he gave vague but believable answers about consulting for different tech companies, contract work, nothing permanent. He showed us his Pennsylvania license again when we asked, and Josh took a photo of it with his phone. The address was some apartment complex in Philadelphia. Birth date made him 42. Everything looked legitimate. Vincent pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket, counted out $1,400 in crisp hundreds right there on our kitchen table. First month and deposit like he'd promised. I remember thinking that the cash was a little unusual, but also we needed that money immediately. A check would take days to clear. This was real in our hands, solving our problem right now. Vincent moved in that Wednesday with just 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. No furniture, no boxes of personal items, no photos or decorations. He said the rest of his stuff was in storage back east, that he was only planning to stay in Portland for a few months while he finished up some contracts. Made sense at the time. Plenty of people travel light for temporary work situations. He kept to himself those first few days, barely made a sound. I'd come home from the veterinary clinic around 6:30 and sometimes forget he was even there. Josh said the same thing, that Vincent was like a ghost, so quiet you wouldn't know another person lived in the house. He'd emerge from his room occasionally to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen, always nodded politely if we crossed paths, then disappeared again. On Friday night, Josh and I went out for dinner to celebrate actually having money in our account again, and when we came back around 9, Vincent's door was closed with a thin line of light underneath. His rental car, a plain silver sedan, sat in our driveway behind my Subaru. Everything seemed fine, normal. Exactly what we'd hoped for in a tenant. The weird things started small, so small I talked myself out of noticing them. On Saturday morning, I could have sworn I'd left my laptop charging on the kitchen counter, but found it on the dining table instead. Josh said he must have moved it without thinking, which was possible. Then on Sunday, I noticed the spare key we kept in the kitchen drawer had shifted position. We had a little ceramic bowl where we tossed random keys, and I'm particular about which direction they face because the bowl gets crowded. The spare house key always sat with the teeth pointing left, and suddenly it was pointing right. When I mentioned it to Josh, he laughed and said I was being paranoid, that one of us probably just grabbed something from the drawer and knocked it around. Monday evening, I went to wear my grandmother's silver bracelet for work and couldn't find it in my jewelry box. I tore apart our bedroom looking for it, checked the bathroom counter, retraced my steps. Josh helped me search for 20 minutes before we gave up. I was upset because that bracelet meant everything to me, but I figured maybe I'd misplaced it somewhere random, maybe it would turn up. Tuesday morning, I realized my good headphones were missing from my nightstand. The expensive noise-canceling ones I'd bought myself for my birthday last year. That's when the knot started forming in my stomach, this creeping sensation that something was wrong, but I couldn't quite name it yet. That evening, Josh came home from work and immediately asked if I'd been in his office. He kept a small desk set up in the corner of our bedroom where he worked on freelance projects sometimes. His external hard drive was gone, the one where he backed up all his photography files and personal documents. $200 worth of equipment just vanished. We stood there in our bedroom, both of us finally saying out loud what we'd been dancing around for days. Things were disappearing. Small things, valuable things, stuff that wouldn't be immediately obvious but would add up. Josh wanted to confront Vincent right away, but I convinced him we should be smart about it. We had no proof. What if we were wrong? What if we'd actually misplaced everything and accused our tenant of theft? That would be horrible. We decided to wait, to pay closer attention, to maybe set up Josh's old phone as a camera in the living room just to see if anything else went missing. Wednesday morning, I left for work at 7 like always, and Vincent's door was still closed. His car sat in the driveway. Everything appeared normal, but I felt sick the entire drive to the clinic, this horrible anticipation sitting on my chest. I got home first that day, around 6:15, and the moment I walked through the front door, I knew something was different. The air felt wrong, disturbed somehow, like someone had just run through the house. Vincent's bedroom door stood slightly open, which I'd never seen before. I called out his name, no answer. Walked down the hallway and pushed the door wider. Empty. Completely empty. The bed was still there because it came with the room, but his suitcases were gone. His laptop bag, every single trace of Vincent Hayes had vanished like he'd never existed. My heart started hammering as I rushed to our bedroom, and that's when I saw it. Our closet door hung open, and the small fireproof safe where we kept our passports, birth certificates, the emergency cash Josh's mom had given us, sat on the floor with its door pried open. The metal around the lock was scratched and bent. Everything inside was gone. I ran to the kitchen, hands shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone, and that's when I noticed the back door. Wide open. Not just unlocked, but standing open like someone had left in a hurry and didn't bother closing it behind them. The screen door banged softly against the frame in the evening breeze. Josh got home maybe 10 minutes later and found me sitting on the kitchen floor, phone in hand, trying to explain to the 911 dispatcher what had happened. The police arrived within 30 minutes, 2 officers who looked almost bored as they walked through our house taking notes. They photographed the damaged safe, the open back door, Vincent's empty room. When they asked for his information, Josh pulled up the photo of the Pennsylvania driver's license on his phone. The older officer, a guy named Officer Brennan, looked at it for maybe 5 seconds before shaking his head. He asked if we'd verified the ID in any way, run the license number, checked references. We admitted we hadn't. We'd just trusted what we saw. Brennan pulled out his own phone, typed something in, then showed us his screen. The license was fake. Not even a good fake, apparently. The format was wrong for Pennsylvania. The hologram pattern didn't match state standards, and when he ran the number through their system, nothing came up. Vincent Hayes, at least the Vincent Hayes we knew, didn't exist. The address in Philadelphia was a vacant lot. The whole identity was manufactured. The officers told us this was more common than we'd think. Rental scams, where someone poses as a tenant, pays cash up front to seem legitimate, then systematically robs the place over a few weeks before disappearing. They usually target young couples or first-time landlords who post on sites like Craigslist, people who are desperate for money and might skip proper verification. Brennan said they'd seen 4 similar cases in Portland in the past 6 months alone. The thieves were smart about it, taking small items first to test if anyone noticed, building up to the bigger theft once they felt safe. They almost never got caught because by the time victims realized what happened, the person was long gone, probably in another city running the same scam. The officer asked us to make a list of everything stolen, but his tone made it clear we'd never see any of it again. No fingerprints in the room. Nothing useful left behind. Vincent, or whoever he really was, had been thorough. They took our report, gave us a case number, and left. Just like that. We stood in our violated house, $1,400 poorer than when this started, plus everything he'd stolen, which we estimated was worth at least $3,000 total. The next few days were a blur of damage control that felt endless and humiliating. We had to cancel our credit cards even though Vincent hadn't taken them, just in case he'd photographed them at some point. We spent hours on the phone with our banks, putting alerts on our accounts, changing passwords on everything. Josh had to contact his previous employers because some of his old tax documents were in that safe, warn them that his social security number might be compromised. We filed for replacement birth certificates and passports, which cost money we absolutely didn't have, and took weeks to process. I had to tell my supervisor at the clinic why I needed time off for all these appointments. Had to admit out loud that we'd been stupid enough to rent to someone off Craigslist without doing basic verification. The look on her face, that mixture of pity and judgment, made me want to disappear. Our friends tried to be supportive, but Vanessa couldn't help saying she'd warned us, and even though she was right, hearing it made everything worse. We installed new locks on every door, got a deadbolt for the back entrance, bought a proper security camera system that we should have had from the beginning. All of it felt like closing the barn door after the horses had already run off. The financial hit nearly destroyed us. We'd counted on that rental income to catch up on our mortgage, and now we were even further behind, plus dealing with replacement costs for everything stolen. Josh picked up extra freelance work, pulling late nights after his regular job. I started taking weekend shifts at an emergency vet clinic across town, even though the commute was brutal and the work was exhausting. We put the house up for sale in May, couldn't afford to keep it anymore. Took a loss on the sale, but at least got out from under the mortgage before the bank started foreclosure proceedings. We moved into a tiny apartment in a worse neighborhood, the kind of place we'd been so proud to escape when we bought the house. It took us almost 2 years to financially recover from those 3 weeks Vincent lived with us. 2 years of rebuilding savings, repairing our credit, replacing documents and possessions. The police never found him, never even got a lead. That case number Brennan gave us just sits in some database somewhere, unsolved, one of thousands just like it. Sometimes I wonder how many other people he did this to, how many houses he walked through taking pieces of their lives. I wonder if he ever felt bad about it, or if we were just marks to him, easy targets who made it simple. We were so desperate to solve our money problems that we ignored every red flag, every warning, every instinct that whispered something wasn't right. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes, knowing we did this to ourselves by trusting a stranger with cash and a fake smile. The first time I met Trevor was at our neighborhood block party, a few months after I'd bought my place. He wasn't flashy or loud like some of the guys there, just a regular man in his 40s, tan from working outdoors, with a calm voice and a worn baseball cap that looked permanently attached to his head. We ended up chatting near the grill about home repairs, and when I mentioned a few projects I'd been putting off, he offered to help. He ran a small contracting business, said he lived a few streets over. He didn't pressure me. If anything, he sounded casual, like a neighbor doing me a favor. Over the next week, I checked out his work online and saw decent reviews. Nothing glowing, but enough to make him seem legitimate. When he came by to give me an estimate, he showed up in a faded white pickup with his business name hand-painted on the door. The way he talked about fixing the back porch made it sound easy, and honestly, I was relieved to find someone local. After a few visits and small talk about football and barbecue spots, I figured he was trustworthy. So when he asked for a spare key, just to let himself in while I was at work, it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. At first, everything felt normal. He'd text me updates, leave a note on the counter, even sweep up before heading out. But after a couple of weeks, I started noticing odd little things. A screwdriver would be sitting on the wrong shelf. The coffee mugs in the cabinet weren't in the same order I left them. Once, I came home to find a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Good progress today," except the handwriting looked different from the notes he usually left. I brushed it off, assuming I was just mixing things up after long work days. Then, subtle changes started stacking up. A photo frame in the hallway was turned slightly, like someone had stood there staring at it. My receipts for a recent grocery trip vanished from the counter. When I logged into my email one night, a few messages were gone. Nothing crucial, but personal enough to make me wonder. I told myself it was probably me misplacing stuff or accidentally deleting things. Still, a small part of me began keeping mental notes of how I left everything before heading out in the morning. One Friday evening, I came home and noticed a photo on my kitchen table that hadn't been there before. It was a printout of me standing in my backyard, taken from what looked like inside my own house, through the window. The angle made it clear the photo wasn't from a phone or some random passerby. I checked my security camera footage, but the system showed nothing, like the recording had been wiped. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but my gut kept whispering that Trevor had access to everything now. Over the next few days, more strange details piled up. My calendar app had entries I didn't remember adding, appointments with names I didn't know. When I texted my sister, she said she'd already talked to me earlier that day, even though I hadn't. Someone had messaged her from my number, pretending to be me, and asked weird questions about our parents' house. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about stolen tools or a messed up porch. Someone was building a version of my life that didn't belong to me. I confronted Trevor the following Monday. He showed up in his usual calm way, holding a toolbox, like everything was perfectly normal. When I mentioned the missing messages and photos, he looked surprised, even concerned, and asked if I'd been having trouble sleeping. His tone wasn't defensive. It was smooth, almost gentle, as if he was the one worried about me. That threw me off more than if he'd gotten angry. He left after patching a crack in the wall, saying we could talk more later, but I caught a glimpse of a smirk as he turned toward his truck. That night, I changed the locks. The next morning, the front door was unlocked. Not broken, not forced, just unlocked. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, except for one detail. A note on the counter in the same unfamiliar handwriting as before. It read, "You're mixing things up again." My chest tightened as I checked every room, every drawer, every closet. Nothing was missing, but nothing felt like mine anymore. Even the air seemed different, as if someone else had been breathing it all night. I called the police that day, but the officer who came over didn't seem too concerned. He asked if there were signs of forced entry or stolen items, and when I said no, he gave me that polite nod people give when they think you're overreacting. He said it was probably a misunderstanding with the contractor, maybe a copy of the key floating around somewhere. I wanted to show him the photo, the texts, the missing emails, but I couldn't. They were gone. Every trace of what had happened had been deleted or replaced, like someone had reached into my life and scrubbed it clean. By the following week, small reminders started appearing again. A hammer sitting neatly on the table when I didn't own one. My shoes lined up by the door in pairs I never arranged. Once, a voice message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. It was silence, but I could hear faint breathing, steady and patient, lasting nearly a full minute before it cut off. I stopped sleeping much after that. Every creak in the floor, every passing car, sounded like someone standing just outside my bedroom door. One night around midnight, I caught sight of someone in my yard through the window reflection while brushing my teeth. A figure in a dark hoodie, standing by the fence looking toward the house. I grabbed my phone, but before I could open the camera, the motion sensor lights blinked off, as if they'd been disabled. When I ran outside, there was nothing, but a single key lay on the porch steps. My old spare, the one I'd given Trevor. I threw it into the trash, locked every door, and sat on the couch till sunrise with every light in the house on. I sold the place a month later, packed what I could, left the rest behind. I moved to a smaller apartment across town. No contractors, no keys handed out, no neighbors I don't personally know. Sometimes I still get that feeling that someone's rearranging my world while I'm not looking. An email missing here, a framed photo turned slightly there. But I never let it grow into proof. Because if Trevor's still out there, I think that's what he wants, for me to notice. When the break-in started around my neighborhood, everyone was on edge. It wasn't anything major, just small things disappearing from porches or garages, but it was enough to make us all uneasy. I live in a quiet suburb outside Richmond, Virginia, the kind of place where people leave their tools out while mowing and trust the mail carrier with open gates. Around that time, I'd been working long shifts at the auto shop, so I wasn't home much. My wife, Emily, suggested we get a security camera since she was alone most evenings. I didn't want to spend a fortune, so I started browsing online for used smart cameras. That's when I found one listed on a local marketplace app. The seller had perfect ratings, and the price was less than half of what a new one cost. It looked almost brand new in the photos, just a little scuff near the base. He said it worked fine, and even included the mounting bracket. I picked it up after work, met him in a grocery store parking lot, and paid cash. He was friendly, maybe in his 40s, wearing a faded baseball cap. The only thing I remember that felt slightly weird was how eager he was for me to test it right away. I figured he was just being polite. The camera connected to our Wi-Fi easily. It came with its own app, which I downloaded to my phone. I liked how I could check in from work to see the front yard or get motion alerts. The first few days, it seemed to do exactly what I wanted, recording short clips when someone walked by, saving them automatically. I even showed my neighbors how clear the footage was. Emily said she finally felt safer, and honestly, so did I. But on the 5th night, things started to feel different. The motion alerts became strangely frequent, even when there was no one outside. At first, I blamed the wind or maybe a stray cat. But when I checked the live feed, I sometimes saw faint flickers, like the image stuttered for a split second, showing a different angle, as if someone else was controlling the camera. I told myself it was a glitch. Still, I turned the device toward the wall before bed just to stop the notifications. The next morning, when I opened the app, the camera had turned itself back toward the door. I laughed it off and told Emily it must have been some automatic reset feature. Now I realize that was the first real warning I ignored. 2 days later, the phone calls began. The first one came around 6:30 in the evening while I was making dinner. The number wasn't in my contacts, but it looked local, so I answered. There was nothing at first, just faint static like someone breathing too close to a microphone. I said hello twice before a man's voice came through, quiet but clear. "Don't burn the chicken again," he said, and then hung up. I stood there staring at the stove, the pan sizzling in front of me. I hadn't told anyone I was cooking. Emily was working late. Nobody else could have known that. That night, I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe one of my co-workers messing around. Guys at the shop do that kind of thing sometimes. But then the next call came the following morning while I was brushing my teeth. This time the same voice said, "Running late again, huh?" The line clicked dead before I could respond. My hands were still wet, and I just stared at my reflection for a while, toothbrush in hand. Feeling this tight pressure in my chest, I checked the call history. Same number. I tried calling it back. No answer, just a flat dial tone. By the third call, I wasn't laughing anymore. The voice knew too much. He mentioned small, precise things, like how I always left my keys on the kitchen counter, or that Emily parked on the left side of the driveway. Every time I asked who it was, the call ended abruptly. I stopped sleeping well. Every noise in the house made me sit up. I even unplugged the camera one night, but when I woke up, it was powered back on. The little LED light blinked green, meaning it was active. I asked Emily if she'd plugged it in. She said no, and I believed her. I started digging through the app's settings, trying to find anything unusual. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under linked devices, there was another phone listed, one that wasn't mine or Emily's. The name just said Admin01. When I tried removing it, the app froze for a few seconds and then crashed completely. After that, the live feed stopped working for me. Every time I opened it, it said connection busy. I knew enough about tech to realize that meant someone else was already streaming the feed. That weekend, I called the company that made the camera. I told the tech support rep what was happening, but he sounded skeptical until I gave him the serial number. Then his tone changed completely. He asked me where I'd bought it and told me, very quietly, to disconnect it immediately. He explained that the unit had been flagged months ago in a security breach. They'd found several models sold online that were modified to stream to a third-party server. Whoever had set it up could watch every feed in real time. He said someone might still have access to ours. I unplugged it right then and sealed it in a plastic bag. But the calls didn't stop. The next night, I got one at 2:14 a.m. This time, the voice didn't sound calm anymore. It was whispering, rushed like someone trying not to be heard. "Why'd you move the camera?" it asked. "You shouldn't have done that." My heart started pounding. I didn't say a word. The call ended after a few seconds and I sat in the dark, staring at the glow of my phone screen until morning. When Emily woke up, I didn't even tell her right away. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe the guy was bluffing, but deep down, I knew he'd seen everything. I took the camera and my phone to the police station later that day. The officer who helped me, Detective Harris, was patient and surprisingly familiar with these cases. He said they'd already been investigating a string of hacked devices sold online, all traced back to a single distributor. A few victims had gotten strange messages or anonymous calls, just like me. The footage, he explained, was being streamed to a private server overseas. Someone was collecting hours of people's lives, watching them eat, sleep, argue, everything. I felt sick thinking about how long we'd been observed without realizing it. They eventually found out my unit was transmitting to an IP address registered in another country. The account had thousands of clips stored, all from different homes. The police took the camera as evidence, and I replaced our Wi-Fi network entirely. New router, new passwords, new everything. It's been over a year now, and the calls finally stopped. I never found out who the man was or why he targeted me, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still catch myself glancing at the ceiling corners, half expecting a little green light to start blinking again. Back when I was finishing my senior year of high school, I was desperate to save up some money before starting college that fall. My mom worked nights at a clinic, and I didn't want her to carry all the financial weight alone. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a small job I could do after classes. That's how I found an online listing for a remote assistant position on a site that looked completely legitimate. The logo seemed professional, and the job description matched what I was capable of: scheduling, answering emails, managing small data tasks. The person who contacted me introduced himself as Evan Clark, claiming he ran a small logistics company based in North Carolina. He sounded friendly, maybe a little too smooth, but I was so focused on landing a job that I brushed it off. He said all the work would be done from my phone or laptop, and that their scheduling system used a custom app to coordinate shifts. It didn't seem weird at the time. Companies use all sorts of apps these days, right? So when he sent me the link, I downloaded it without thinking twice. The app was called Workmate Pro, and it looked real enough. Blue interface, sign-in screen, a little loading animation. The only odd part was that it asked for several permissions right away: access to my location, contacts, photos, and camera. When I asked about that, Evan said it was to verify attendance and prevent schedule fraud. He even laughed and said, "We had people clocking in from the beach once." It sounded plausible, and I didn't want to come across as difficult. I gave it full permission, thinking it was just part of being thorough. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. I received simple tasks, mostly fake emails to categorize or short surveys to review. Then, slowly, I began noticing strange things. My phone battery drained faster than usual, even when I wasn't using it. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the screen faintly lit, like it had been active moments before. Once I swore I heard the camera shutter sound in the middle of the night, though I convinced myself it must have been a notification ping. It's easy to rationalize the little things when you don't want to believe something's wrong. One afternoon, about 3 weeks in, I was in my bedroom trying on clothes before meeting friends. I remember hearing a faint buzzing sound from my desk. My phone's screen was on, camera app open, but I hadn't touched it. The front camera light flickered for half a second before going dark again. My chest tightened, and I just stood there staring at the screen, half expecting it to move on its own again. I told myself it was probably a glitch. Phones can be weird, but deep down something started gnawing at me. I turned the phone face down and tried to shake the feeling, but for the rest of the night I couldn't stop glancing at it. The next morning I woke up to an email from Evan saying the company servers were being updated, and that I shouldn't open the Workmate app until further notice. That's when I decided to look up the company myself. I typed the name he'd given me into Google. Nothing came up. No website, no LinkedIn page, no record at all. I checked the App Store again, and Workmate Pro had vanished entirely. My heart pounded as I scrolled through my downloads, realizing the app wasn't from any official source. It hit me then. I had installed it directly from the link he sent in a message. Later that day, I tried calling him. The number was disconnected. Every message I'd sent on the chat platform showed as delivered, but he never replied again. I remember sitting at my desk reading through our old messages and feeling stupid for not noticing sooner how generic his responses had been. When I told my mom, she immediately called the police. They took my phone as evidence and told me not to touch anything until their cyber unit could analyze it. That night felt endless. I kept replaying every moment I'd used that phone, every private second I'd forgotten the camera was even there. A week later, one of the detectives called to ask if I'd noticed any strange activity online. I hadn't, but that same evening, my friend Lydia texted me a link with no message, just the link. I opened it and saw my own face staring back at me on a shady-looking website, captured from what seemed like my bedroom. There were dozens of images, taken at random times. Me studying, brushing my hair, sleeping. Some photos were worse. My knees nearly gave out, and I remember screaming for my mom. It didn't feel real. It felt like someone had stolen pieces of my life and plastered them on the internet for strangers to scroll through. The investigation that followed was long and draining. Detectives from different states got involved, because it turned out I wasn't the only one. The same fake company name had been used in job listings across multiple platforms. Every victim was young, mostly college students trying to make some extra cash. The spyware on our phones had been designed to activate cameras and microphones remotely, uploading everything to encrypted servers. Hearing that made me sick. It wasn't just invasion, it was hunting. Someone had built a system to watch people like me in the privacy of our own rooms. They eventually traced the activity to a man operating out of Florida. He'd created a network of fake job listings, posing as different employers each time. When they raided his apartment, they found multiple hard drives containing thousands of files. My photos were just a tiny fraction of it. The detective told me he'd been selling the content on dark web forums, using innocent job seekers as his source. I remember sitting in the police station, trying to hold it together while signing the witness statement. My mom kept her hand on my shoulder, silent, like she knew there was nothing to say that could make it right. For months after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound made me check the corners of my room. I stopped using my phone at night and covered the camera with tape. Even though they caught him, the thought that strangers had seen me in those moments still crawls under my skin. Some of the photos were removed, but the detective was honest. Once something hits the internet, it never truly disappears. The idea that I'm still out there somewhere in files I'll never find is something I've learned to live with but never accept. It's been a few years since it happened. I eventually changed my number, got a new phone, and moved to a different city for college. Sometimes I'll get random emails from unknown senders, and even though I know it's probably spam, I still feel that same spike of fear before deleting them. I'm sharing this now because I wish someone had warned me back then that evil doesn't always come with a threat or a weapon. It can come disguised as opportunity. If you're reading this and you're applying for jobs online, please double-check everything. Don't make the mistake I did.